Necrosy.
You scum.
He did it. He said it.
God, you gotta throw the whole thing out now.
Where is it?
everyone.
Where
I
is it?
literally leaned
Give it to me.
backwards when I took my headphones out.
God, wait, don't beg for it. God. Oh, God.
Hello everyone and welcome to Lorecrimes. My name is Andy and I run the YouTube channel The Remembrancer. I'm joined here today with a gathering of fellow Warhammer lore channels. Hal from TheAmberKing.
Hello.
Eli from Deadlifts for the Dark Gods.
Hello, everybody.
And Colin, also known as Pancreas No Work.
Also known as Senator Armstrong because of my hairline.
Oh, God. Jesus Christ. Oh, so everyone, that's a hell of a way to start the first one. So today, this brand new podcast will be a journey. We're taking everyone that is watching or just interested in Warhammer lore from any topic, from beginner all the way to expert level. Probably not. So if you are a complete novice, if you don't know anything about Warhammer, or if you are, say, a savant or, you know, a sommelier, that's a wine term, isn't it?
Sommelier, yeah.
Sommelier of Warhammer lore. This is something where you can definitely pick up new details or perhaps perspectives that you never ever properly engaged with in Warhammer. It's something to really bridge those two together. And today we are starting with the War in Heaven, the very beginning of the Warhammer timeline. I'll pass it over to Colin.
Why, thank you very much. That's like he said, we're going all the way back to the beginning. And by all the way back, 65 million years. So why don't we start with who some of the lads in this were? The most important ones, of course, the Necrons. You might have heard of them. You might have seen them in Games Workshop stores and went, who are those cool little robots? Well, this is their origin story. So, the ancient Necrons were pretty much the end-all be-all of science. If you can think of a sci-fi tech, they probably had it in spades. And you'd think, oh, it's pretty good for their lives. Except it wasn't so good, because their sun was awful, and the species as a whole essentially had cancer taken to the extreme. And it was so bad that as they go to the stars, they explore the galaxy, it sticks with them. It's basically their DNA. Meanwhile, let's take a little turn really quick. Another race that was around were the Old Ones, who were basically psychic gods. They use more or less magic, psychic powers, magic. They're essentially interchangeable to them to do whatever they want. They want a planet to be moved over there, they can do it. And they're, if not immortal, so long-lived that it essentially makes no difference. And when the Necrons find these gentlemen, they say, hey, would you mind curing our cancer that's infected our species? And the
Please,
old ones,
sir, may I have some more, essentially?
Exactly.
Please heal us.
A smidgen of health. And upon asking, the old ones politely say, get bent. So it's time for war. Unfortunately, the Necrons, as advanced as they were, weren't gods, and the old ones were, if not gods, not far beyond. So the war goes pretty horribly for the Necrons. So, as the war's going on, or I should say, as it's ending, they find these floating gas clouds that eat stars, because it's floating space gas. Why not? That's what it does. And the Necrons, of course, because is this not your first thought as well, decide to turn the gas cloud into a physical god. They give it metal bodies, and then it's called the Catan. So these Catan, these floating gas clouds that now have physical metal bodies, decide to make their Necrons a deal. Quite the deal. They feed it. The
Definitely
deal,
a bit one-ended.
Little bit one-sided. The Necrons.
Little bit of a, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
Before read the fine print was a thing. You know?
Yeah, that wasn't invented yet. That was a human invention.
Goddamn contracts.
Goddamn. The deal was, hey, you feed us your entire race, and you'll get cool metal bodies. And the Necrons were like, yeah, that's a good idea. Why not?
Sounds
so they
awesome.
do so. The end result's pretty awesome if you're not a Necron or involved in the situation. So for us Warhammer players, pretty awesome. For everyone in the situation, not so awesome. Lose their souls, but now they're cool Terminator robots. So it's time for what else but round 2 of the war. And the C'tan start kicking the old ones' asses. The Necrons start kicking the old one asses. Everything is just a mess. By
Everyone
this
just
point.
dogpiles them. Like, everyone hates you. Why are you like this?
Pretty much. Everyone, they had lost the war. Well, now it's time for war part 2.
It was a little bit Randy Orton slithering out, and then they came out. Oh, God.
And as the war's going on, the old ones, getting understandably a bit desperate, decide we need some allies of our own. Well, they don't have any, so they need to make them. So they make the Eldar, or the Space Elves, and they make the Krork, who will come up later. But for now, let's just stick with they make the Krork. Those Eldar, the Space Elves, in turn make their own gods, who start beating up the C'tan, and getting beat up in turn, because this is just the apocalypse across the galaxy. The Krork, for their part of things, yell really loudly and smash Necrons, so if nothing else, they're doing their part perfectly. No one can ever accuse the Krork of doing things wrong.
They're living their best lives. They're doing what they're
They've read their Marcus Aurelius. They're in sync.
They know exactly what they're here to do, and what they're here to do is smash.
Nice.
And then the old ones are mostly wiped out. Not entirely, but mostly. And then, because in 40k, what you do in real life affects the afterlife, these beasts called enslavers from the afterlife suddenly start running rampant. And all the old ones who weren't dead, yeah, they're not dead.
The name's a dead giveaway too.
I wonder who
Enslavers.
named them anyway. Like, were they always known as enslavers, or is that an Imperium thing where they just like those things? Oh,
It's pretty
I've
much
got
a
a good
job
name.
description at this point. It's very much a, he's a contractor, he's an enslaver. He's just he's just gonna do what he's
he's
gonna
got
do.
his little license on his pinned on his chest, like, "Hi, I am enslaver."
Yeah, it's
Seems
like,
like a
That's
nice
what I
fella.
do.
it's like this guy's a smith. I bet I know what he does. He's a carpenter. I can figure out this guy's an enslaver. I think I've got the details down.
A bit of a mystery sometimes. That title.
And so, and so, because of the rampant war affecting the afterlife called the Warp went from being a nice, calm, peaceful place, wonderful, perfect for a Sunday walk, into an absolute just mess. I wrote down a different word that is a swear, so I will let us just say it is simply a mess. The galaxy, even beyond the afterlife, is also a mess because several different species worth of gods, essentially, use it as a boxing arena. And everything, everything's just going to hell. The C'tan, meanwhile, their part in this whole affair, aside from killing the old ones, were really kind of the worst gods you could ask for if the whole eating the entire race's souls to make them Terminators didn't
Wasn't to
give that
give away.
Exactly.
They're pretty happy the entire time as well. I mean, they've definitely read their Nietzsche. They're on
It's
a
like,
new level.
C'tan, who hurt you? You're the worst ones here. Who hurt you? Why are you like this?
Well, that's
Are
the
they just
fun
straight up evil?
thing.
Straight up evil.
They're just like that. No one hurt them. They're just like that. And so, granted, though, they're a bit tired because, all-out total war, turns out, takes it out of you. And the Necrons decided now is the time. Now is the time to act to get rid of these jerks. And so they shattered them into millions of tiny little pieces just to take them from unstoppable gods to Pokemon, essentially.
Got to catch them all at this point.
Exactly. You got to catch all the C'tan. So they catch them, they put them in these chambers. But that's in turn tiring for the Necrons, because even if they were weakened, it's still a god you just broke. It took a lot out of them. So, what else to do? If you're a robot, you don't need to worry about aging so much. Sure, there's rust, but compared to a person, not much problems with longevity. You can fix rust. So, they go to sleep for 65 million years. This is the natural outcome. This is what they decided is best. That, and of course, there's the old ones' constructs. The Krork, they're still having the time of their lives. They exist to fight. There's a lot of fighting.
Absolutely. In an 80s montage, they just became incredibly powerful and they're just wrecking. It's just unbelievably destructive. Just to see them in person, you'd be literally soiling yourself.
Not for long, only because they would just kill you. Exactly as long as it took to reach you, that's how long you have to piss your pants.
Just enough for the scream to hit your eardrums, and then there's suddenly like, oh, I am gone.
I don't have eardrums anymore. It's not a problem.
Adapt, overcome, survive. No eardrums.
Except there's no survive in this one.
Making a meme of that with the orc face pointing now, just to warn you.
And then the top
Oh my god.
The Eldar are very psychic, much like the old ones, so it's their turn to rule the galaxy, essentially. So,
And when we say psychic, we mean like full on, just like imagine the Force from Star Wars and traditional like magic mages combined. That's like psychic
Star
powers.
Killer kind of levels where he's just like pulling a Star Destroyer out of orbit kind of levels where he's just like click.
That is the average Eldar, just yanking things out of the sky just for fun.
That's the underachieving Eldar.
Yeah, that's the guy who got D's in school.
Just his mentor, they're like C+.
Yeah.
Ugh.
And so
Strong.
with all that, it's time for the nap. And now the Eldar now own the galaxy. And the Eldar's gods now own the, let's just say, rather turbulent ocean that the warp has become. And the Krork eventually degrade into orcs as the war in heaven wraps up. Their own gods eventually show up to, as their species does, beat the ever-loving crap out of everyone nearby. The old ones are still dead, just in case you were wondering how that situation was going. Still gone.
Very sad. Big upset moment.
Big
Old ones gone.
deserved.
F in the chat for the old ones.
Big F in the chat for the old ones, my top G's. Jesus.
And that's, for people who are new to Warhammer, is the War in Heaven. Are there any questions on things I could have been more clear on? I imagine yes.
Do we know exactly when the orc gods? Because I would have thought they would be born like when they were Krorks, but instead they're like, no, as they got stupider, then they had gods.
Krorks originally, when they are created, they are, let's just say, they make orcs look like a professor in terms of intelligence. And so the way that the warp particularly works within Warhammer, gods are something you have to choose to believe in. And so the Krorks at the time did not have a unified concept of gods that the Eldar or the Eldari did.
Ugh.
Well, that they were semi-smart, but they didn't have the, let's say, they didn't have the ability to kind of form that idea of gods because they hadn't been, I don't know if the most nicest way to put it is dumbed down enough from infighting. So that's why they didn't have any.
They went from the average human being roughly level of intelligence to so stupid they loop back around to being smart, which is why they eventually created their own gods. Their
that's kind of deep, man.
Failed task successfully.
Their little belief field they have, which we will not get too into because that will be coming later, didn't exist really. I mean, it to some extent it likely did, but it didn't make their own gods until they went from Krork to Orc.
Any more questions you two have?
Well, how about I know a lot of people think the Chaos Gods were created mainly by humanity, but in my head that doesn't make much sense at all because it was one planet of humanity. So corn being made in the medieval ages seems kind of silly. Could one blame the War in Heaven for the existence of chaos in general?
100.
That's an interesting one though, because chaos technically. Chaos is a formation of our own concepts of like our own emotions and evil. It's a very good question actually, because the idea, I guess, of chaos gods for someone who is a beginner, the chaos gods affect the modern day timeline, the 40k timeline and the 30k timeline, which are the main sort of settings that we interact with in Warhammer. And these sort of gods, at the time when all these Xenos, so the Necrons, the Eldari, the Krork, there may have been you could say the beginnings of these sort of, I say ripples or sort of ideas collecting within the warp. But as a general concept, these chaos gods are much more of our interpretation of these ideals, I assume. but that may be, again, if it's completely wrong, that's just one of the law crimes, and we'll scratch that up for later.
First law crime added to the
first law
roster.
crime made. He got Chaos Gods wrong.
And unfortunately to say, to get a bit meta, this is one of those things that Games Workshop lore has kind of wavered back and forth between humanity created them and they've been sort of timeless. So
Yeah, that's very true.
there's a lot of things up to interpretation. That being said, if it weren't for the war in heaven, the warp wouldn't have been as nearly as much of a mess as it was to allow them to form in the first place. So even if they weren't directly created at this time, this massive galaxy-shaking war is why the conditions for them being created exist in the first place.
Oh, this house is very flammable. But then again, when we got here, they left a bunch of matches and like very dry wood and timber everywhere. So it's not really our fault that we burned the house down, because look at all this stuff they left here.
It would have happened eventually if the weather was too dry.
Exactly.
There's always a good answer. There's always a good explanation in the end.
Mhm.
Do you have any more questions before we lead on to our expert section?
I kind of do. With like,
Go for it.
So like the Necrons are essentially the first like beings that were not gods, I guess. So there wasn't anything before Necrons. They were literally like, we're pretty much the only sentient beings other than the gods themselves, the Catan and the old
That
ones.
is something, as we've know so far, is intentionally left a mystery in terms of and in a sense, the Necrons being the first sentient life. That belongs to the Catan. That's a complicated question that we will definitely be tackling later. But
Okay.
in terms of the Necrons are not the first sentient life. The War in Heaven is just mostly told from their perspective. So, because since they're the only ones, mostly the Necrons being Terminator style robots who don't age are the ones who still directly have a link to that time.
Yeah, this was
Okay.
And because they went to sleep for so long, in a way, it was almost as if it was yesterday for them. So they're the ones whose perspectives we get. That being
And
said,
they woke up and they were like, we don't have any WD-40 and we need some right
need
now.
it now.
Just begging, gagging for the WD.
The closest answer I found on that is there's a line that said when the Eldar were either uplifted or created. There's another thing that's left vague, whether or not they were existing and then uplifted or outright created by the old ones. Is that whenever, either way, when that happened, the Necrons were already ancient. So they're certainly very old, even beyond the 65 million year old robots thing. Whether or not they're the very first is a bit of a different question, but they're very old.
So we're unsure if they did a Mass Effect and they were like, hey, you, have this spaceship. Oh, cool. And then they just got like really, really ramped up quickly.
Yeah.
Intentionally, much of it is mystery, considering it's so far into the Warhammer forward. This is the beginning of the Warhammer timeline. So, what records do truly survive that long? Even in our own world. Is there any more questions before we take on our next section, boys?
I think I'm faithful that you'll probably answer them.
Yeah,
Thank you very
same
much.
here.
Alrighty then. So we begin in the expert section. So if you are particularly new to Warhammer, or you just, it's Warhammer 40k, or you may have seen Horus Heresy, which is Warhammer 30k, we're not going anywhere near that. We are traveling 60 million years all the way back to the very beginning of our Warhammer timeline. So the Warhammer timeline begins, as I said earlier, from the perspective of the Necrons, who at this point they are called the Necrontyr. So these are it's a humanoid race, and they are of flesh and of bone. They are vaguely similar to humans. They kind of look like almost like kind of Voldemort, slightly taller, a bit more, I don't want to say bony because that comes across wrong, but they do have a kind of they are human-esque in their
Spindly,
fleshy
almost.
Very,
appearance.
very sad looking.
Sickly
Very-
might be a appropriate word.
Sickly is a great word for it. And they live on a home world where the homeworld itself actually is quite interesting because it's not just something in Warhammer lore where it's basic. It's actually similar to our own world, since Necrons and Necrontyr share, I'd say, inspiration from ancient Egypt in our history. So their homeworld is a place of massive deserts. So there's a lot of desert life involved in a lot of their stories. They make reference to things like dealing like scorpion-style creatures in the sand. They have a very much, let's say, I guess, desert-like existence that definitely shapes them as a people. Although their homeworld is very, it's not just desert. There are things like trees and very early versions of, we'd find the world recognizable to human eyes. And so the big, let's just say the most important thing to learn about the Necrontyr themselves is 60 million years in the past, the Necrontyr basically got it bad. They had an awful deal, and even from their just evolving into sentience into their earliest days, they are right next to a super irradiated sun. The protection they have. So our world, we have certain protections from radiation. They barely have any of that. And this radiation affects every single aspect of Necrontyr, mindset, everything. The radiation is just dangerous, and will come into play at many times throughout their story. So the Necrontyr, as they, very similar to the humans, they've evolved a culture, they have language, they start to build things, and Necrontyr culture, as it starts to flourish, shall we say, is immediately from the outset just extremely hierarchical. So everything is about just power structures. They venerate ancestors to an enormous degree, and for this
How
entire,
did you live so long? Oh, you're important.
Pretty much, but basically, ancestors. Dead daddy is king. If that's the best way to put it.
Yeah.
Being dead in Necrontyr society is what's in right now. It's the coolest thing. It's the latest fashion.
All the cool kids are dying dead.
All the cool kids are dying. You just can't handle me at my. This is what peak performance looks like. So
Drops dead.
So all across the Necrontyr homeworld, they have Necrontyr dynasties, which rule over pretty much every single part of their society, and politics involved. You can imagine a place that has dynasties and ruling families. Politics is absolutely just ruthless, scheming. It makes Game of Thrones. Take Game of Thrones from a continent and turn it into a planet in terms of the levels of scheming. It's just, cutthroat, shall we say. I think there's an important thing to understand about how the Necrontyr view general society and how each of their people interact with it. There's a great excerpt piece from one of the fantastic Necron books, which describes how a certain member of a dynasty will interact with what the lower castes of society, and the phrasing that they used it as was, the people who are at the bottom are fuel. So they are things to be used, things to be burned as the fire of Necrontyr ambition is fueled, shall we say. So that they are just, you are almost worthless if you are not a member of a dynasty or a servant, or even, again, just absolutely worthless at the bottom of society. And there are many Necrontyr dynasties that rule over these vast areas. There's many notable ones. I'm going to try and pronounce some of their names, but you have to forgive me because my pronunciation will be, shall we say, offensive in this attempt. So there's some notable ones are, here it goes, Marenach, Mefrit, Nefref, Nihalak, Novuk, Sautek, and Cesarkhan. So these are the most. There are some dynasties that have, let's say, lower dynasties within them that serve them, but these are kind of the most powerful, and each of these are specialized in dealing with, say, a certain sector or a certain specialty in war. So Sautek, I think, is particularly martial in their specialization. So they often have, huge number of troops and soldiers. Nihalak were the dynasty that was involved in a lot of, let's just say, they hoarded treasure, and they were very much, information was the tool for them, and there were some that were more involved with scheming. So every Necrontyr dynasty is somewhat specialized in a certain way. Now, as we get back to the most important part of their entire world in this very complex society, they have that god-awful sun in the sky for them. And the biggest part of the Necrontyr life, as we said in the beginner sections, the Necrontyr suffer from cancer. And I mean, on a level which it is inevitable that this will be the cause of your death. So you can imagine the kind of dread that you have to live with being a Necrontyr. I'm sure many of us have at some point felt a little bit like, had my heart pumped a little bit too fast today, and so you get a little bit worried,
stressed,
get a little bit stressed.
I get that mysterious pain. I don't know what it is, but it goes away. But for me, it goes away.
Yeah. So the Necrontyr, and there's another fantastic piece from the book Twice Dead King, which describes how a member of a ruling dynasty looks over to some of his servants, and he just sees this Necrontyr that's just covered in growths. And it's that you can imagine, like, how does that image hit you guys? I'm pretty sure it's such a stark contrast, reminder of, as death, they worship death, obviously, and its death is pretty much in their face at all times. And a very interesting. Go ahead.
Is there like a life expectancy for the Necrontyr at this point? Do we know anything about how long they live ish? Or I suppose it'd be hard to gauge because we use Terran standard years.
The reference we have kind of been given is that from a Necron perspective in the modern timeline, they compare it to humans, and they say humans lived a little longer on average than a Necrontyr did. So we assume maybe like 60 years is like old age for some. Most people would never die of old age, so that you can imagine. So short, painful lives. Actually, even just to show how much it's in their face every day. It's even said in the Twice Dead King book, a great book if anyone wants to read that. It's a great foray into Necrontyr and Necron lore. They mention how when the Necrontyr awake every morning, they literally pat their body down and check for growths and the cancers. They do it every single morning as they grow up. So you can, it's a rough deal. And in a general sense, Necrontyr are in a sort of, because their bodies are fragile and radiation has affected them so much, they are in like a general amount of pain as well. So being a Necrontyr sucks. Yeah. Generally, just you can compare it to our life, and it's just like, wow, I am ticking every good box, and they have the worst. And so the death is everywhere for the Necrontyr, and because of this, death is pretty much invaded every part of their culture too. So the veneration, as we said earlier, the veneration of death is to a level where it is the word sacred. The word sacred does not even encompass how much they are obsessed with death itself. So when people die, like we said earlier, they are buried in massive mausoleums, often mausoleums constructed by those of the lower caste who may get a burial in a piece of dirt next to it if they're lucky. That's how much these dynasties and these hierarchical places are just obsessed with death. Death is again, it's the new fashion. It's pretty much every part. It's on their mind every day.
It's the only fashion.
And the only fashion, pretty much. There's no choice. And so after it's an untold number of years, it's not specified, but over generations, the Necrontyr finally, as we see in our own world, over time, they start to become more technologically advanced, even though their planet is basically filled with tombs at this point. There's almost no more space. And they eventually find a way to leave their home world, and they finally do, one small step for a Necrontyr, one big step for a Necrontyr kind. They manage to leave, and they create something called stasis crypts, which are designed to hold them in a very small chamber, which is preserves them in time. It moves time to such a small degree that it's almost like they were paused in time. That's how powerful they had become in their technological advancement. And this is when they finally they're in the stars, they're colonizing new planets, and this is when we finally see that they've, or just to backtrack very slightly, when I say that they're good at science, I mean the ability to control time is, I'm pretty sure all of us are like, damn, that's pretty
I mean,
incredible.
to be honest, if your living world is just suffering and pain, you're probably spending every waking moment like, how do I fix this? How do I solve this? Oh, time manipulation. Oh, that kind of works. Oh, well, next thing. Rather than, like, let's just. Why didn't they just think of a way of like fixing the sun, or just like put a big thing around it? Like, we got all this stuff, and they didn't just put like a big shell around it.
Big shell, just
like a shade. Like a lamp cone around the sun, just to like slightly diminish the rays of the sun.
Dunce cap.
Do you remember the intro from a Pixar film with the lamp jumped the letters? They should have just tried that. I don't know why they didn't try that.
With all you've been saying about like the sun, I don't know why, but my brain just jumped to like the Teletubbies with the sun with the face on it, and Necrons being like the Teletubbies with their own like headgear. I don't know.
They are not that happy about it.
No, they're not happy about it, but they have to go out every day, and the sun's there like, I'm gonna get you.
Oh my god, is it creepy? So they definitely they have over generation. They've tried to find ways to deal with it. You can imagine, obviously, it's on their minds at all times. But that's where we come later into the story about some of the things that they had tried to do. So as they are finally, like, they're starbound, they do have fantastic technology. They are, I would say, at a level beyond what our current world is in terms of technology. Again, they have like disciplines where people use science. They literally use science to control time itself, and they have like a discipline called cryptex, which are people who specialize in that discipline, and it's very much prevalent, the use of technology in everything they do, and it is everywhere. And so they're finally sorry, go ahead, Colin.
So there's what's that quote? I can't remember who said it. It's like, any sufficiently advanced science is indistinguishable from magic. That's what they're rocking. It's so advanced science. We will go, that's magic. It's not magic though.
It definitely has a ancient Egyptian twist to it. So they very much do remind us of the kind of mystics of ancient Egypt in terms of their titles and the way that we have mythologized them. And that's why they become so recognizable to us, because they almost look, again, like magic. It's a fantastic point there. So as the Necrontyr are, we're talking like generation upon generation of them are just, you can imagine how quickly life is for the Necrontyr. So many have died to get to the point where they're in space, and they're traveling very slowly at this point because they don't have any faster than light travel technology. That's one thing that is
just like,
unfortunate.
Thank God we're getting away from the sun, though. Whoa.
Very much so. So this is
possible.
They absolutely they run, and this is the part where they finally come across another sentient life, and this is where they meet the good old ones. So the old ones, the way that Warhammer describes them, they're a cold-blooded reptilian psychic race that are essentially, as Colin said, near immortal. We're unsure if it's to the point where they either had a rebirth when they died, or they just lived so long that it was basically immortality to what we perceive it as. And they are thought to be almost the first kind of sentient race within the Warhammer universe. They are, in a way, to us, in the modern 40k and 30k timeline, a complete mystery. So they are, even like the only things we do know about them are very small details, such as the cold-blooded. They are immensely powerful psychers, so they were able to use, again, like we described earlier, that kind of psychic powers, like using like the Force in Star Wars and traditional magic, like a combination of that. So they are incredibly powerful, and they have let's just say, as the first sentient life in the universe, you could probably say that they were maybe disappointed with how empty the universe is. And so the old ones were known for spreading life across much of the Warhammer universe, and many of the races that are in the modern timeline sort of descend from those very creations and those very early days that the Old Ones had seeded life on many planets. I'll just pass over to Colin very quickly to talk about the Necrontyr expanding.
Thank you very much. So after generations of expansion, the Necrons by this point, they have a decent chunk of the galaxy under their belt. They've been around, but despite leaving their homeworld with the awful, horrible, very bad, no good sun, their DNA is essentially so corrupted by it that you could be born a Necron the other side of the galaxy. You still have this space cancer, these
The
gross-
inherited cancer.
Yeah,
That's pretty bad.
Yeah, that's their superpower is cancer.
you gotta
Happy birthday, son.
Yeah,
it's a little bit of like mate, you gotta wipe the slate clean, bro. If you gotta chuck the whole thing out, gotta redo. It's just bad.
That's essentially how corrupted.
You're basically saying the Necrons are a bunch of spoiled bananas or something. Like they're instantly just.
I think saying they're rotten's a bit harsh, isn't it? It's a bit. I don't know.
They've done no great crimes yet.
Not yet. But they've really got a chip on their shoulder.
Exactly. And that chip's going to get worse soon, because once they find the Old Ones, they say, hey, like I said, can you cure this horrible this cancer we suffer from? Because it's kind of ruining our lives and keeping them shorter than they were. Because like Hal said, they had about slightly shorter than human lives. That's with the space cancer. So who knows how long they would have lived if it weren't for that. But that's just a bit of speculation on my part. But
we'll never know.
We'll never know. Either way, they ask him, can we get this cured? And the Old Ones, it was a bit more than get bent. They do think that because the galaxy's so empty and all life they find is sacred to create, that they don't want to change life more than they need to. And unfortunately for the Necrons, because their DNA itself, it had gotten to the point where basically cancer is part of them, that the Old Ones were like, we're very sorry, but this is such an integral part of you, we don't want to change it, because surely there's a reason for it. This is just how your race is meant to be, and because of our views, we don't want to change that. So that was the beginning of the Necron relations. The Necrons saying, can you cure us? Or the Necrontyr saying, can you cure us? And naturally being a tad jealous of the Old Ones' essentially unlimited lives. And the Old Ones saying, no, we will not fix that, because this is how you're meant to be.
You can imagine how that hit them. And imagine the refusal and how... I mean,
to be fair, though, they did. What happens after that? You kind of go, well, yeah, maybe the Old Ones had a good reason to be like, no, I think maybe this is a good idea that you just, you see.
You wouldn't say to your doctor, "Can you help me?" He says no, and you feel good about it.
I'm just saying, if I was a doctor and I was like, sorry, I won't treat you, and then my patient murdered pretty much most of the people on the planet, and then encased themselves in metal, and then called all their spaceships tomb worlds, and had a big nap, and then went and killed everything else in the galaxy, I wouldn't lose too much sleep. That's all I'm saying.
Hindsight's 2020.
Maybe they wouldn't do that if you just cured them, though.
Exactly.
Maybe.
Intervention.
Or maybe they would have just gone, oh, this is quite nice. Let's flex on our power. Now we can do whatever we want. And they just ruin the galaxy.
Let's flex on our cancer power.
Yeah. we did time control when we had the space cancer. Now what can we do? And then they destroy the galaxy or whatever,
They were like, check out my new drip. And it's just not it's just not it. So as you can imagine, the Necrontyr have just been told, we will not save you. And that news, as they have an empire, so there's billions of Necrontyr at this point, and they occupy many different planets, and many different dynasties hold these different planets. And that news of that, they will just not be helped. Just, you can imagine what that would do. Again, like the analogy of your doctor saying no to you. That level of anger, hate, in almost, you could say, justifiable way.
And
even
it lives forever, and the Doctor can, create things out of matter, but still.
Yeah, he's a good man, I swear. But so the Necrontyr, and this is after they'd already tried everything too. So they, despite all of their technological advancement, as Colin said earlier, their DNA is just corrupted by radiation. It's just they have no way to salvage it. And so after this news comes, the Necrontyr basically their empire dissolves into an all-out civil war, essentially. So you can imagine when you have all these like vast dynasties and they hold different swaths of territory, and again we mentioned that politics is ruthless earlier. So all of these different worlds that are basically filled with a servant caste who essentially just obey that whatever their dynasty tell them to do. It's just sent to war, and it's a hot and cold war in many ways. And this is where we find out. So this is introduction into the story, is that Necrontyr society is traditionally ruled by a figure known as the Silent King, or Queen sometimes, we're unsure, but mostly the Silent King. And he's the head of what's called the Triarch. So this is the Triarch Council, and he has two other Pharaons, which are very high-ranking members of Necrontyr society, who are there to interpret what he says, because he is the Silent King, and he only speaks to his two Pharaons. Is unsure why he does this, but it is perhaps it is someone
He's just incredibly lazy.
It is like. It is, you could say, people putting the salt on something and go, oh, that's spicy, and it's just
basically
salt.
saying the Necrons started Chinese whispers, where they were just like, I told you one thing, now tell everyone else. And then over time it gets changed.
Not so much. It's only one person to one Pharaon, and he just announces it to the rest of the court. So it's only one person. So that's luckily that's not the issue. The only issue at the time, you could say, is that the Triarch Council, which is the Silent King as the character itself, is usually a member of one of the ruling dynasties, and it does change. It changes many times over Necrontyr history, and so the Necrontyr's Silent King at this time basically has no authority. It's a hot and cold war, and over leagues of space, and essentially Necrontyr society is decaying. So they're civil war is everywhere. They have no hope for overcoming their cancers, and the Silent King, being worried about basically the dissolvement of his entire race, comes up with a sort of a plan to reunite all of the Necrontyr, gather everyone together and unify them in one direction. And unfortunately, there's nothing more unifying than war. And so the Silent King declares that they will attack, and they declare war on the Old Ones. They declare they will take the secrets of immortality from the Old Ones, and in a way take revenge for them refusing to help them when, again, you could say they're at almost their lowest in terms of, they need help for their people. So this war in heaven truly begins. This is the birth of the war in heaven. And the war, despite the Necrontyr's, amazing technological advancements, and they have devastating weaponry, they have powers over time, they are utterly outmatched in every way, because the Old Ones, they utilize something called the webway, which we will, I think, delve into a further episode. But let's just say, a great analogy is it was almost like, I think Colin, we'd said it before, it was like a wormhole and a tunnel as well. Like a worm. Yeah, go ahead.
Wormhole, highway, tunnel, basically,
and
across reality.
So they use these highways to completely outmaneuver the Necrontyr, and the Necrontyr themselves have no talent in psychic abilities, and psychic abilities just utterly destroy them. And this war ends up pushing them all the way back. They lose all of their territories across all of space. Things that took them, you can imagine how many years it took them, especially for how short their lives are, to build up these worlds. Generations, and it's just all lost, and they are pushed back towards their home world. And you can imagine how the Necrontyr, all billions of them cramped on this homeworld, are
they see the
feeling.
sun and they're like, "Not you again, the bane of our existence."
Pretty much. So it is, and this beginning stage of the war in heaven did take generations for that to happen. So it's the people who started the war are no longer there anymore. So it's just awful. And this is where in our story we say a new player enters the game. So
Challenger approaches.
yeah, Goku in his drip just turned up. So so this is where the Catan enter. So the Catan themselves are said to be the oldest life within the Warhammer universe. And when we say life, it's tricky because they are, as Colin said earlier, they are a mass of energy, like a cloud, essentially. And to say that they are alive is a very tricky thing because they are so different from what we may consider life themselves. And they are these enormous, we're talking like planet-sized formations of clouds, and they kind of drift through the universe. They've been doing it since time began in the Warhammer universe, and they often feed upon stars. They literally just they suck the energy. Big suck the energy.
They're basically a bunch of primordial moody teenagers just roaming around the galaxy.
Oh, my bank account.
I'm
is
eating
gone.
that. I'm hungry. Ugh. Like that's what
The idea of them being teenagers is hilarious. God, that's just that kind of disgusting. I have to say.
Form of life, Dad.
I'm not going to my room.
So they are these enormous, I guess, creatures, and they are almost, I think, me and Colin describe them like they're like viruses almost. All they do is they are things that don't really think, and they just feed, and they have etheric. They're described as having etheric wings that they glide throughout the universe. And even in their, they are said to be the oldest forms of life in the universe. But they, at some point, way during the past, they encountered the first sentient life in the universe. So they met the old ones way before the Necrontyr. And bit awkward. But because considering how the old ones are so, they seed life, they believe life is sacred. They actually, in a way, they don't consider the Catan alive. So, and they just see the Catan as destroyers. Whenever they seed worlds, they create species, plants, and things like that all throughout the universe. They don't want the Catan destroying, obviously, all of these creations. So, whenever they encounter Catan, they have often destroyed them. And so, at this time, we return to the Necron homeworld, and it is the word just dump doesn't quite encompass how awful the situation is. So this is a generation who are completely isolated, overcrowded, and they are just angry with the universe. And this is when they first detect something strange within their system. They detect something feeding upon their star. And this is where they first encounter the Catan. And they actually design like unique, because of the technological advancement of the Necrontyr, they actually design machines that are able to communicate with them. And this is so important because this is the first time that the Catan ever pay attention to the material universe. It's like the first time that they have almost, they traverse a concept, which is almost, even just to say that is insane, because they are so different from what we would recognize as life. And the Necrontyr become curious. They are, in a way, I guess, communicating with them. And this is where they make the big no mistake they might regret later. And this is where they create them vessels, which are made of a special material called necrodermis. Necrodermis is an innovation of the Necrontyr, which is described as a living metal. And it's integral to many parts of their technology. And when we say living, it's not like nanomachines or anything like that. It is like a living thing. And as the Catan, you can imagine like a planet-sized form of gas. It's pouring itself into this necrodermis vessel, and the Catan basically perceive the material universe for the first time, and they really learn quickly. So they start to taking information. They're talking. They're using language for the first time in their existence. And as this happened, more Catan are basically being drawn to the Necrontyr's homeworld. And the almost insidious part of this is when the Catan's necrodermis shell, they start to shift and they start to resemble the Necrontyr's pantheon of gods, which, as you may have possibly guessed, all seem to look like gods of death, considering death is the thing that even after so many generations they are still obsessed with. And so the Catan are resembling things like images like the Grim Reaper and things like that. They look terrifying just to us, but obviously to a Necrontyr they are very much, it is in the form of like Odin or Thor or something similar, or
Jesus.
or we said earlier, I think me and Colin said Jesus riding or surfing on was it Korean Jesus from 21 Jump Street? Riding on a cross, surfing it.
Take Greek mythology, except everyone is Hades.
Pretty much, yeah. They are.
Hades is a friend of
they
mine.
have got enormous metal abs, and I'm just kidding. But they are. So the Catan are not a numerous race, but there are some notable Catan that do often pop up within the Warhammer timeline. So I'm going to try and pronounce these and not completely ruin any credit I have in the Warhammer.
We are
space.
all native English speakers, remember?
Yeah, so this will be terrible. So some notable Catan are Asgorod, Emberesh, Lash Urdra. Oh my god, they're awful. Langdagor, Yigrinar, Maldaroth, Sar Norga, and Mephet Ran. That being the most notable, something to remember for later. And when we say like the Catan are like a gas cloud poured into a necrodermis form, they are very much like the power radiates from these creatures. They are if you were standing right in front of like the Catan, you would definitely be like, I'm not sure if I could say this was not a god, in terms of just how the power that radiates from them is incredible. And I'll pass over to Colin quickly to describe how the Necrontyr dealt with these new creatures.
Of course. So during the during the reign of the Silent King Zarek, there's that pronunciation for you again.
Yeah.
Catan Mephet Ran, he came to him and said he has an offer that I don't think he said you can't refuse, but
it was definitely
what else are you gonna do?
layers of manipulation were involved with it.
Yeah. So the Catan would grant the Necrontyr new strong bodies and a chance to destroy the old ones, who both of them, the Catan and the Necrontyr, had both in some way been slighted by the old ones. Perhaps the Catan were not as wrongfully slighted. You could say the Necrontyr were given the bad end of a deal. The Catan, maybe they were just being dicks. But either way, both of them were slighted. Both of them were let down.
It seems like a great deal so far, doesn't
Exactly. And so he comes and says, hey, I'll give you some new strong bodies, and like I said, and a chance to destroy both of them. And the Necrontyr decided it was time to upgrade themselves, and I will get back to hell.
Yeah. And so as this offer, you can imagine everything is going wrong for the Necrontyr. Terrible bodies, terrible, the old ones have been, just ruined them. And so the offer was accepted, much to probably to maybe the worst decision of all time in the Warhammer universe, some might agree. But Cesarek agreed to this decision. And so the decree went out, and the Necrontyr, so all of the Necrontyr on their home world, so we're talking billions of actual, like, they are people very much. They have their own thoughts and feelings. They're so close to humans, it's almost scary. And everyone is dragged out of their homes, like even from people who lived in the great dynasty cities to the people who lived in just simple brick huts. It's it's even described again in the fantastic book Twice Dead King, about how over many, like much of Necrontyr history, there have been like Necrontyr like who are like outcasts who often would paint themselves in red, and they used to drag people as offerings to the gods traditionally all throughout like Necrontyr history. And these people, the Necrontyr, painted in red, they go into people's homes and they drag everyone out. And notably, even only this is happening and everyone's being dragged out. Some are going willingly too, because much of this had been discussed within Necrontyr courts. And only one person, known as Oricon the Diviner, who famously in Necrontyr history was the only one who was outcrying, and he was the only one who was saying this is a bad idea. But again, that is nothing compared to the overall like just weight of the choice, and he was taken from his home too. It made no difference. And so you have in the Necrontyr's homeworld, there are these huge, like we're talking huge columns of Necrontyr marching. It's almost like imagine if you were like one of the people marching in that column. It's almost that kind of background dread of what's happening. I don't think you ever want to be a person in a marching column for generally anything. And they were pushed towards these massive bio furnaces. And as they were approaching these massive, I'm talking like, temple-sized, huge, green-fired, burning temples. They saw like above it the Catan, the Catan that looked like their gods are floating above. And so as basically we're talking about men, the women, the children, they are all pushed towards these furnaces. Some of them are like still have their cancerous growths on them, and they don't even make it towards some people die on the journey towards this biofurnace. And now as an entire race of people, we're talking billions of Necrontyr enter these biofurnaces, an entire race is burned alive. So this is Warhammer lore, grimdark at its finest. It is very much so everything that they were before is very much just burnt down. So as they would enter these biofurnaces, their entire body is immolated almost instantaneously. They can feel it. It's something where it's obviously terrifying to even just think about, let alone imagine going through. And all of like the Necrontyr, so who they were as a person, everything they experienced is taken from them. It's almost turned into information. It's like dragged out of them, and it gets imprinted upon these new necrodermis forms. And these are strong. They will not age. They will not have sickness. And then essentially they march out of all of these biofurnaces. The Necrontyr have died, and now they are the Necrons. And the Necrons are who we interact with within the modern timeline. So every Necrontyr is gone. And so as the emergence of a new, or maybe say changed race, so the Necrons have emerged. And the interesting thing about this deal, something that we should always read the fine print in these sort of, when you make a decision like this, is that when the Catan themselves, they were poured into these necrodermis husks, they were changed in a way such as how the Necrontyr, when they become Necrons, they are changed too. So the Catan traditionally feeding upon stars, something we could say deeply evil had been awakened within them. And the Catan learned now that feeding upon stars, it wasn't really enough, and something new had replaced their food source. And they found that they liked to feed on the suffering of sentient life. Oof. Which, yeah. So, good old, this is the difference between, star is, terrible, cheap takeaway, gourmet meal is suffering, which is a terrible analogy.
Suffering is a succulent Chinese meal.
Chinese, you're dead wrong about that. What have you done with it?
You just make it now, and then there's like all these like death gods, and then there's a Gordon Ramsay Catan like, it's raw!
Or
It's full of
anguish
cancer.
sandwich.
Oh my god. It's like Gandhi's flip-flop, classics. So they have, and you can imagine, so these, the Necrontyr before saw them as gods, and now when the Necrons emerge, so even the children are turned into Necrons. They look up and they realize that the Catan have just fed on an entire race's suffering and death. They have gorged themselves upon the souls of the Necrontyr. The Necrontyr are, when we say gone, I mean like even their souls, their parts that connect them to dream. They don't dream anymore. That thing is taken from them. They are very much, when we compare them to Terminator machines, they have almost, in a very way, they have become binary. They have become machine-like, and the entire Catan have just devoured that suffering, and they are powerful. And the very the great thing about grim dark stories is the deep tragedy of many of their the great thing about it is tragedy. And when the Necrons do emerge from these biofurnaces, they are in every way pretty much, other than body, lesser versions of themselves. So the members that were a part of high-ranking dynasties, they are the only ones who retain their personalities. So that's why we may see in Warhammer 40k like columns of mindless automatons. That is the ordinary people who were Necrontyr. And as they have emerged now, they feel like something is missing from them. They don't feel like anything. They just have metal bodies. They don't actually have the sensation of touch. And they the soul of their people is gone. And even worse is that as they emerged, a command protocol has been linked. So every Necron is now completely under the reign of the Silent King, who, when he emerged from the transformation, was equally horrified by what he had done. And him turning to the Catan, they had fulfilled their end of the bargain, and to essentially ignore what the Catan said next was, the Necrontyr were dead, and so the Silent King can only think of the Necrons as the Catan declare that the war in heaven has begun again, and that they will claim vengeance. They will destroy the old ones, and the Silent King, and in a way, the Necrons don't have any choice. Is it either death now, or do they find a way? So now the war in heaven has truly begun again. So the Catan and Necrons, so this is the Catan who are just gorge themselves on an entire species. So they are souped up and they are incredibly powerful, and they have an army, and they decide now they will unleash themselves and they will go fight the old ones. And the old ones just struggle against this tide. So the galaxy before was already it already had, some of the scars had remained from the previous parts of the war in heaven when the old ones had fought the Catan. So the old ones had fought the Necrontyr. But now the galaxy is, when we say hellscape, I don't think it really truly captures the word, because this war, the reason it is called the war in heaven, because the war is on a level where it is godlike beings clashing in war in a battles that would never reach the same height again. And there is at this time much of sentient life within the galaxy that is seeded by the old ones, and this is either completely destroyed by the Necrons, it is either consumed, entire races are consumed by the Catan, and it's just, or some are even subjugated. It's even said that some are subjugated by the Necrons at the time too. These immortal, essentially robot beings who the lowest echelons don't really feel anything except obey the command, and they have maybe the smallest essence of their personality hidden deep within. And the Necrontyr the Necron ruling dynasties, who are essentially by command protocol ordered to follow their Silent King. And so as we enter this new stage of the war in heaven, the old ones are essentially, they're on the back burner. They have no answer for this combined force, and it is now where they decide they need to create their own devastating weapons and armies to combat the Necron and Catan threat. So this is where we finally have the introduction of, in the setting, perhaps the most, let's just say, cultural races as the Eldari and the Krork. And actually, even at this time, we had to emphasize the weapons too. So this is when they even create immense structures such as Blackstone fortresses, which are immense like ships that still survive into the 40k timeline, and they do pop up every once in a while. So they finally create these new races, and to describe the power level of these races at the time is something where the Warhammer timeline will never see the Eldari, the Krork, the Necrons at such heights of power, and any battle that they engage in is just devastating. It is truly like the idea of planets being ripped apart is common. That is how the level is far beyond our own understanding. And I'll pass it over to Colin to quickly talk about these new races.
Yes, mostly one of them, the best one in Warhammer, my favorite, the Eldar.
Oh,
I heard that.
Man of culture.
They're all simply uncultured. But because they're also born here, they'll get their own thing later on, of course.
Oh, definitely.
Demand it. But for now, they are important to the war in heaven. So a little bit about the Eldar, or the Eldari, as they're called, because that is a much more
copyright
friendly name. They're humanoid. They look like people, indeed, and probably closer than any other race in 40k. They look like human beings, and they're a race that the psychic / magical, the mystical powers of the warp is entwined with them more so than any race, perhaps the old ones. And they were made, uplifted or made, either way, this was done to exploit the Necrons and the Catan's weakness to psychic powers. Because them being creatures purely of, future
science,
but science nonetheless.
Or past science, technically, at this point.
Past
60 million years.
That's a good point. Past science. They're weak to the warp, and the Eldar were supposed to exploit that. As you could possibly guess, given that they are Eldar, space elves, they're inspired, of course, by Tolkien's elves. And in a lot of ways, especially come modern 40k, but even by this point, there's a lot of traits you can ascribe them that come from Tolkien from that.
Arrogance.
And a lot of
pointy ears.
Well-earned arrogance.
Pointy ears.
all of the major hit thing. All the major points are hit, and the old ones monitor them and let them grow. And indeed, much of their prowess and technology was fostered by the old ones, like the webway. Eldar didn't make it, although they're the only ones who still regularly use it.
They might claim that they made it, though, to be fair.
Well, they probably claim they made it, but
arrogance.
That's basically space janitors.
Space janitors. No, you done him dirty.
Now we just found this. We just clean up the webway, get rid of.
This is where we're gonna fight now.
They're the ones keeping it going. They're not space janitors.
Space.
Cruel, mad.
That's insulting on many levels.
So, but just to give a context for how massive this war is, even the Eldar can get themselves traced back to this, and they weren't even involved in starting it. That's how comprehensive this whole mess was,
and that's how long, particularly, it is as well. And entire races were taken and fostered all the way up to, galactic powers. That's how long the war in heaven is not given. There's no length of time specified for how long it went on or how many battles there were, but it's meant to be just the word, the word apocalyptic just doesn't quite encompass how just encompassing and wrecking it was for the galaxy, and it went on for a long time. And this is where we delve very nicely into our next most prominent race from the old ones. The old ones did create many other numerous races too, but the Eldari were sort of their main elite, shall we say, for countering the Necrons. But for their, shall we say, their big muscle, their big foot soldiers
still need their foot soldiers in front of them.
So this is where the Krork come in, and so the Krork themselves are, as we say in the Warhammer setting, they are very much, as we see them now, they are very much orcs, but they are the kind of ancestors that we wish they could be in some regard. They are so they are stronger at this time as well. The size of a Krork actually is something debatable. It's meant to be larger than some of the Primarchs. So if someone who are familiar with the modern timeline, Primarchs are like 8 foot, 9 foot tall, something even 10 foot tall, superhuman characters, and the Krork themselves are ginormous. So even for modern 40k orcs who are said to be larger than an average man, just by a couple, or isn't it that their heads are slightly lower? they lean forward something because they're like their backs.
Yeah, not got great posture. The orcs, you know.
Yeah, not they.
There are no orc chiropractors, you know.
No, they couldn't afford the healthcare.
The closest you get is an orc punching you in the spine.
Yeah,
pretty much. They these are ginormous creatures, and similar to how orcs work in the modern timeline, they do over time as they fight things, they became more powerful, and you can imagine the kind of Krork that were fighting in these apocalyptic battles. So you can imagine how strong they became over time, and they were just imagine they are pretty much like Hulks. That's the best way we could think of them. Imagine an army of like billions of Hulks and you throw that at a planet. So it's almost hard to comprehend, but so the Krorks were integral to just smashing into Necron lines, and they were
not fair when you consider the Necrontyr as like we've got these weedy, cancer-filled little and it's like this big. Oh no. Don't let them get anywhere near you. Oh wait, there's the Eldar throwing like magic missiles at us. Oh no.
Very much. So it is. So this
the size of continents. Give them their credit.
Yeah, they were. to say like the modern 40k and 30k Eldari were almost. It's almost laughable how much more, because how much knowledge has been lost over time. How much more powerless they are compared to the Eldar at this time. They are leagues above any psycho we would see within the modern 40k timeline. So as this war has been, it's lost to time how many years this war has come on. So been hitting on them. How many years this war has raged on, and again, it is important to truly get across how when an entire Necron force under command protocols with Catan who've been feasting on planets and been absorbing more power, the Catan do fight like almost like demigods, as we describe them, just massive swaths of death and destruction. And again, the power of the old ones are fighting too, with the Eldari and the Krork, and it's just you wouldn't be able to, you couldn't truly just comprehend the destruction. And to understand it, particularly with the Necrons as well, the idea of death to them is so robbed that Necrons, when they're necrodermis shells, we call them shells because they are literally, the Necrons inside are just information at this point. And when the shells are destroyed, they are simply either the necrodermis will start to repair itself as the living metal, or their information is basically teleported back to these great monoliths, which are like floating pyramids. And these essentially reprint a new Necron and just implant the information in. So the almost a horrifying thing of Warhammer lore is you could be fighting a Necron and not realize that as the Necrontyr was a child. But there's nothing that remains truly of that child anymore, and you are simply just fighting a automaton because it's just been repressed, and it's just under layers of unimportant Necron soldier. Barely any information was needed, and that thing will just constantly fight in battles. So the Necrons are basically almost endless, But the almost kind of really sad part of it is also as like the Necrons themselves. There's no new Necrons. They never. They
It's
are only
finite Necrons. They just keep
truly.
regenerating.
They never they regenerate. They can be rebirthed within a monolith, but they are truly. There will never be another Necrontyr born in the game. They are very much a dead people, and they
Army of ghosts.
pretty much they are very much it's almost like the deeply tragic part of it is that there's no new Necron, and then they only at times, if they're not still within the range of a monolith, they will die.
I was going to say, like, is it just a case of if there's nowhere for them to, like, if there's no bandwidth, they're just
if the monoliths are destroyed, they are just so their numbers only diminish, and the Catan are essentially like treating them like just the slaves that they are, and they're just thrown into battles, and they are almost and it's powerless to ignore them because it's just certain death to go against them at that point. And for most of the Necrons, they just can't ignore the Silent. They cannot ignore the commands of the Silent King. So
damned if you do, and damned if you don't. Even if you could ignore it.
Yeah, it's one of the greatest bits of Warhammer is like that deep tragedy. It is obviously all that epicness, but that deep tragedy about the Necrons, and obviously you can imagine how they have viewed everything they've gone through so far.
It's like, what's the one thing worse than space cancer? And you think nothing, and then
just
like,
the death of your race.
Yeah,
it's pretty. It's but obviously it's something we can all feel for them. And so this is a part where, at this stage in the War in Heaven, the Catan are essentially so powerful that they're almost just. They are, even with the might of the Old Ones, which some of the Old Ones have died at this point, and some of the the Eldar and the Krork, it's just not enough to beat the onslaught of the Catan and the Necrons. And this is a interesting part of the story where, something that we will touch on at another video, hopefully in the future, is the Eldar at this time do have their own pantheon of gods, although the way that we would view gods at the time is very different to how we would today, because it was less mythologized. It's something we will go into great detail in our own video on Eldari. So there's the one of the gods of the Eldari named Kegorak. If I'm saying that wrong, please.
Some people say it's Chegorak and
Kegorak.
I do believe that's the closest we're gonna get.
I keep thinking it. I always keep thinking it's like Kakarot or something from Dragon Ball Z. I keep thinking of that name.
I say Chegorath.
Very much.
His name is Goku.
He's pretty much so. So Goku in the drip. This is an Eldar, the kind of the low key figure, the Eldar trickster god, and this is his story will be told another time. But at this time in the War in Heaven, he converses with one of the Catan known as Tsara Noga. I'm not going to say that word again because it's awful. So this is a kind of turning point within the war, because he's called the Laughing God, the Eldar one, and he convinces Tsara Noga to devour his own kind. Essentially, the other Catan, the old ones are basically, they're not really a danger to them anymore. The danger is your brothers, or they wouldn't really consider them brothers or sisters, but your danger is the other Catan, and this leads into essentially a civil war between the Catan. And unfortunately, the entire galaxy is caught in the middle of this, because the Catan have just been gorging themselves for, we could say millennia, or we could even say more. So they are truly like just so powerful, and the Necrons are particularly caught within this own like civil war as the Catan are fighting each other and for territory. And this is the time when good old the Silent King Zarek, or Cesarek, after we can imagine his patience for how long he has waited for a moment like this. And this is something where you could ask ourselves earlier, why did he not fight the Catan immediately after being turned into a Necron? And it was for a moment like this. I'm sure that's a lyric to a good song. So he chooses this moment to unveil his plan, where he had constructed the Necrons had constructed weapons using his command protocol. He had made them construct weapons that, to say like they are dangerous, again, the word doesn't quite truly grasp how dangerous they are. They are galaxy altering weapons, and even within the modern 40k timeline, it is said that they would never use them again because of the danger of them. And the use of these very weapons actually they scar the material universe for all time. They have done something that is to show the level of just millennia's worth of plan and the desperation to kill the Catan. You can imagine the kind of hate and malice poured into something, the creation of something like this. And they use these weapons, the Necrons, to, as I said earlier, to shatter the Catan into shards. And the reason they are shattered into shards is because the Catan have consumed so much of the galaxy and so much sentient life that they are almost integral to the very universe itself. They are almost they are essentially unkillable. And it's actually only one of them in all of Warhammer history. Only one Catan was ever destroyed. The one named Landugor, if I'm pronouncing that right. He's the only Necron to ever be, only Catan to ever be destroyed with the use of these weapons, and that led on to consequences later that we will explore in another video, hopefully one day. So the Necrons have done it. They have shattered the Catan into shards. They have taken these shards, Pokemon style. They've collected them, and they have essentially turned these Catan into batteries, because they are literally energy. They've been consuming stars since their birth, the dawn of the universe, and they have been turned into batteries for the Necrons. So it's very much a reversal of the slaves have become the master. The chain pulls from one end, but it can be pulled from another, and they are essentially locked within many vaults, the Catan, or used in machines or in great planet-sized literally planet-sized machines. That's how long. So that's how incredibly powerful they are. And at this point, the Necrons have taken enormous amount of territory within the galaxy over the war in heaven, as planets were either subjugated, conquered, or just robbed of life as the Catan had eaten it. But the galaxy is just ruined. And as we mentioned earlier with the good old talk of the enslavers, this is the part where all of this, as the way in Warhammer it typically works, is sentient life, our dreams, all of our emotions, they ripple within the mirror universe known as the warp. It's a very important part of Warhammer lore. And the warp, I think the best way I've always described it is it's the reflective sea of sentient thought, which obviously you can imagine even in our own thoughts, they are often wonderful and also very dark. So the warp is
thought in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't lie, I swear. So the warp is it has rippled for a long amount of time with just the death of untold trillions. And it is when the warp becomes unstable, it can breach into real space, our material universe. And at this point, this is where the enslavers come in. So the enslavers are literally enslaving, shall we say. They are enslaving. They are creatures solely of the warp. They are simply creatures of the mind. But because of this bleeding from the warp, they are able to enter real space. They are devouring sentient life. They have the power to even destroy Necron tomb world. They are just ruining the galaxy. And the Necrons can sense that the galaxy is almost it's nearly broken. And they can also see something on the horizon that in a way scares them too, which is they have seen the rise of the Eldari, because the Eldari themselves have only been growing in power the entire time. As there are more Eldari, their gods are stronger. They have become more advanced. They've become more proficient with their talents. They
can procreate as well.
Indeed.
Yes, a big
Now he pipes up.
With no
Yes.
strings attached.
Very much so. So there are new Eldari all the time, but there are no new Necrons, and so they decide that the galaxy is this position is untenable. They need to go to their what they call their great sleep, and so this is where the Silent King decide they need to wait for a time when the galaxy is healed, and for when the Eldari, as all is a destiny of all empires rise and fall. And so they decide they need to wait for a time in which the Necrons will not have to face such a strong adversary, and they decide to go into the great stasis sleep. So they enter into all of the great dynasty clans have reconquered much of the space that they lost and gained more territories. They have created tomb worlds across many different planets, and they decide, as they take their mindless automatons and then some of their more sentient members of their dynasties into these great tombs, and they enter the great sleep. Then this is, when I say decision, I mean this is something where the Silent King, this was the last command he used on his command protocol, and then he chose to sever the link, and he left the galaxy forever. Well, no, sorry, not forever. He left the galaxy until one day he may return. And this was the end of the war in heaven. Does anyone have any questions?
Are you saying that the biggest war possibly in the galactic history was ended with a nap?
It's pretty much, yes, it pretty much did.
I think
It ended with, well, the big ending is the destruction of the Catan, and you could almost say the end of the war in heaven is the destruction of the Catan. I mean breaking of the Catan.
I think they
Any
earned
more
that
questions?
either way. I think it was
They earned it.
They very much, yeah. They've been through a lot. They're like, I've had enough. I'm off to the pub, mate, or something like that. They're very much.
We had space cancer. We had simultaneous mass genocide and enslavement, and then we had like all the gods of the universe breaking and killing each other, and now the Eldar are a thing. Yeah, I'm going for a nap. Makes sense.
Yes, there's the Necron. It is mostly done from the Necrons' point of view and their story. This is all of the story that takes them from their earliest days up to essentially the end of the war in heaven, and it's a war that costs untold number of lives. It is almost lost to time. This war, 60 million years in the past. The fact that they are still around 60 million years later, obviously, is incredible. And they are very much in their current form. They are the lesser version of themselves. They are very much a people who have, you be careful what you wish for, because you might get exactly what you want. They are stagnant. They are a lost people with no future, but again, they have no past. And the very last detail I wanted to add is that as soon as the Necrons, one of the great parts from another fantastic Necron book called The Infinite and the Divine, it describes the fact that when they were Necrontyr, their memories of that time is almost like they view a dream, and they don't, as the way we view dreams, it's almost kind of erratic and it doesn't make sense, but you kind of remember some of the key details. But as soon as they became Necrons, they remember everything, like a computer would. They literally remember everything as a Necron, and that is the part of them that is lost is the people who they were before, and that is the war in heaven. So, any more questions do we have?
Sure.
I think that was very comprehensive. I've got to be honest.
Oh, thank you.
Very good work, you two.
Thank you.
Thank you. And for those who are watching this or listening to this lovely video, Please leave any suggestions for topics you would love to hear. We want to hopefully take that beginner understanding all the way to that level where you really know how, but essentially you know the story, and it's a fantastic story in itself. Make sure to like and subscribe too.
Yes, please.
Anyone else?
Please.
Final words. I have 2 final things I'd like to say.
Go for it.
One, I know it was brought up at the end, and I just feel like I should point this out. How old is the Imperium? Anyone? Andy? I know you know.
I believe it's it's a few years,
Yeah,
10,000 years.
a couple of millennia,
10,000 years. That's crazy.
Going on
10,000.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
What empire only fell just before the Imperium rose and lasted for 6 years? You want to?
I'm just saying,
the
the Necron have come back at a prime time to get clapped by the Imperium, and then we'll get rid of them.
Press X to doubt.
Yeah, well,
They're
they're
back
getting
to get what
clapped
they
by the
deserve.
Eldar.
well, the Eldar are pretty much clapped already, but
Yeah.
No,
Imperium
yeah.
They took
The Imperium are going
themselves.
to take a
Yeah.
note out of the Eldar book and go at it like rabbits.
Fine, I'll do it myself.
And the Emperor's not gone yet, so hold your horses.
And then,
Yeah, all I was going to say is, please put suggestions in the comments about videos to do next. But the Eldar one, I think we can wait a few months.
Yeah, who even likes Eldar anyways?
Yeah.
Heresy.
Great. But yeah, I hope everyone listening enjoyed this. And
Yes, and for our next episode, that will be on Black Templars.
Yeah.
Yes.
jumping ahead
Yes.
of the timeline, but everyone loves the Black Templars.
Mhm.
Yes, they
Even
are.
the Necrons.
Indeed.
I doubt.
Okay.
Even the enslavers are like, cool.
Yeah,
heck,
they're pretty
Black
cool
Templars.
guys.
Yeah, I'll watch that.
Thank you all for watching, and have a good one.
Just one final word, if I could add.
Of course.
Necrosy.
Scum.
He did it. He said
Oh, God, you gotta throw the whole thing out now.
Thanks
Where
for
is
coming,
it?
everyone.
Where
I
is it?
literally
God.
leaned
Give it to me.
backwards and I took my headphones out.
God, wait, don't beg for it. God. Oh, God. God, if that's in the intro, I'm gonna riot.
I literally leaned so far back, my headphones got unplugged.
Oh my God.